Justin, always great to talk to you. So you did a deep dive into who is really running college, like who is the strongest person when it comes to running college football. And I say person or entity. Is it the SEC or Big Ten? Is it Congress? Is it the president? What did you find out about the levers moving college football and college athletics right now as you dove into this that maybe you didn't expect?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of been the running joke with college football, for a long time that there's too many cooks in the kitchen and no one's really in charge. Everyone knows that. But when we started out, devising this piece and how we're going to put together, we were trying to pinpoint and narrow down, all right, who's actually pulling the strings here for college football? And I guess the revelation was the joke is more true than I think even people realize. It was impossible to just say, that ESPN and Fox are in charge, or that the Big Ten and SEC or Congress. All of these people have had pretty significant impact in some way on the sport. And there's a bunch of others that we list in the piece. Some more than other have had a hand in the way things have gone over the past 2 decades. But it's as much as it's kind of become like a cliche joke, you really can't just narrow it down to 1 or 2 people who are kind of guiding the sport of college football. And in some ways, I think that points to the issues with the sport. But in other ways, I think if you really talk to people that love college football, that kind of chaos, as annoying and frustrating as it is at times, it's also a big reason why I think a lot of us kind of love and are just consistently, finding fun and quirky things about the sport.
Well, I mean, the thing is that you go through this article and it's not just, it's the president of the United States, it's the Congress, it's TV networks, the Brian Seeley, who's the commissioner of the College Sports Commission now, which I would say that of all these things, he might, if you had to rank them in order, if there was an actual order, he and Charlie Baker would come in last because they really don't have any control over what's going on at all. And the College Sports Commission is a month old, and we still don't even know what the rules are, Justin. That's the strangest thing, I think, in all of sports is we have an enforcement body in college athletics, but we have no idea what the rules are.
Yeah, you're right. Because if you're talking about this from the whole House settlement perspective, you have the NCAA, which is a big, they're one of the main defendants in this lawsuit settlement. And then you have this newly created College Sports Commission, which is the Power 4 conferences, or Power 5 in this case, because the Pac-12 would still be a part of it because they're part of the lawsuit. They're basically saying, hey, we're putting this guy in charge of kind of this new entity. And you're right. So if you're just kind of laying it out for someone and explaining it to them, then that person would say, well, then clearly either Charlie Baker, the head of the NCAA, or Brian Seeley, this newly appointed head of this newly appointed enforcement arm, those would have to be the important people, right? And you're right. You can make a case that you could maybe even put these guys below Jimmy Sexton, the super agent, or something like that. And part of that, honestly, is to Charlie Baker's credit, the NCAA president. He's kind of, I think, helped put things in a more progressive direction by actually taking some power away from the NCAA. But, on the Brian Seeley College Sports Commission front, it's only been a month. It's been a pretty rocky rollout for this new enforcement arm. We haven't really seen them, kind of use their enforcement or use their power in any way. And most of what they have been doing is trying to re-explain or, kind of mea culpa for some of the early blunders that they've had.
Justin, do you, with all this information in your article, researching it, do you feel like we are going to have to get to a point where there is a player-led sanction, either associated with the NCAA, with rev share coming into play, with all this NIL, where you see athletes have a more of a hand in this or a voice, or do you think it will still lead towards the networks and the NCAA coming to these decisions?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about collective bargaining and athlete unionizing. I think the problem there, I'm not the first person to make this point, it's just really tough in college sports because of how transient the players are. They're coming in. I think by the time they kind of, might even have an understanding of the value of unionizing or what it would take to do that, most of them are, on their way out the door and going on to, whether it's professional sports or professional, job in another field or something like that. So I think that's going to be a really tough thing with so many different athletes and so many different sports, at kind of different aspects of their life. I think that's going to be a tough thing to just really kind of nail down and have a very representative player group. I think the biggest thing that I took away from this is there's a lot of power in Congress and there's a lot of power in the courts. Congress could kind of come in and they could say, all right, college football has an antitrust exemption and we're going to pass legislation that kind of lays down the rules and this can decide everything. The problem, as everyone knows, is that it's really tough for Congress to do anything, especially if you're going to need bipartisan support and it doesn't really move quickly. And so then the other, I think, area or aspect that has a bunch of power is the courts, and we saw that with the House settlement or going back to Alston and O'Bannon, all these major cases that have impacted college sports. It feels like it's, kind of the next big decision is going to be either who acts first. Is it Congress kind of coming together and putting some legislation in place, or is it another massive lawsuit coming through the courts and deciding something? And kind of history and common sense would suggest that actually the courts, as long as stuff takes in that realm, is actually probably going to be the first ones to act before Congress could come together and get something decided. And neither of those have anything to do with the NCAA or the college football playoff or anything that happens on the field, which again just shows how many cooks are kind of in the kitchen with this.
How university presidents are an interesting thing, and they're the ones who have the final say on a lot of this, yet I would say, and I'm just going to give them a generous 50-50 split on that. Half of them know what they're doing when it comes to athletics, and then half of them, it's not even in the middle. It's half of them know, and the other half have no clue and have to have somebody kind of explain it to them. And that's not because they're not intelligent people. It's just they were not hired to run that part of the university, and they have no expertise in it. They could have been a physics, the dean of the physics department, and then become the university president. It's if you go back, Justin, I'm not sure if you ever followed along or read the transcripts of when UCLA and Cal were negotiating out how much of UCLA's Big Ten money would have to come back to them because it's in the university system, and listening to the people on that board ask these questions about sports media rights because they genuinely didn't know. That is what we're dealing with when it comes to a great many of the decision makers when it comes to university presidents.
Yeah, it was similar when Texas and Oklahoma left the Big 12, right? Remember Bob Bowlesby having to explain to these university presidents why it was so financially impactful that Texas and Oklahoma were leaving from a TV revenue standpoint. And so, yeah, to kind of reaffirm your point, these university presidents have a ton of power. They hire the athletic directors. They sit on the boards that decide, the fate of the college commissioners. So, the people that we think of as making the decisions, athletic directors, commissioners, the university presidents are their bosses. But as you said, most of them, there are some that are very engaged. They certainly understand the financials of sports, but they're running entire massive, sometimes, with some of these state universities, just huge organizations. And they don't necessarily realize that's why this is important, that the men's basketball team is getting a unit from an NCAA tournament victory. And so, yeah, they're usually relying on what these athletic directors and what these conference commissioners are telling them in meetings or telling them, on these Zoom calls is, hey, this is important. We need to follow along with this. Most of them are probably going all right, I'm going to trust the person that knows what's going on here. And so if you ever got kind of a university president that maybe had served as an athletic director or a commissioner or something like that, they would have that perspective. But for the most part, those people aren't in these positions. And so you're right. There's kind of this inverse of how much power they have and how much understanding they have of the system.
How many more Cody Campbells do you think it's going to take for us to see some rules being made, decisions being made, more headway in this space? I think, like you said, it's a passion project for him. And so he's going to put a lot into this and want to move the needle. How many more people like him do you think it's going to take to where we see a lot of change?
I think the biggest challenge for him is, he's at some point, whether it's him or whether you're talking about anything happening at a big picture level, is you will have to have the SEC and the Big Ten get on board. And that was why the whole college football playoff thing is kind of hilarious, because if you're talking about, the Big Ten and the SEC agreeing on massive sweeping federal legislation, they can't even agree on how many college football playoff teams that we're going to have or what the format's going to look like. So that does seem a little far-fetched. But if those two conferences, Sankey and Petiti and all the necessary parties, if they can kind of get on board with something, whether it's Cody Campbell's vision or whatever the next, TV deals look like with Fox and ESPN, that I think is what's really going to chart the course for college football. And that's why I let off the piece with them, because if those two conferences, those two men ever kind of get on the same page and start working together, I do think you'll start to see some things get done.